Sorry.
Darlene, it's John Harkins. Do you have me?
Yeah, John, how are you?
Okay, I struggled a little bit to connect. I had to type in the password and all that.
Okay.
Just making sure.
Hello, John. Hello, Darlene. How are you guys?
Hi, Tom. Good. How are you?
All right.
You standing on the pepperoni assembly line, or are you at home, Tom?
I just came back. I smell like one big grease ball right now, though.
Glad we can't smell you.
Yeah.
Hey, Lori.
Hi.
Hi, Lori.
Hello.
I don't see Lori.
I got on the hat, Tom, if you're looking for it.
I see you now. I got it. I had operator error on my part.
I can turn it up.
Just want to let everybody know we are live because it's 5:30.
Okay. Who do we have with us? Is Brian with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, Brian, is your staff, do you know, is Neil and Dee and Teresa?
Yes, everybody I need is logged on.
Okay, we got board members. We got three that I know of. Me, Tom, and Darlene. Well, four. Me, Tom, Darlene, and Lori.
When is on?
Okay. Okay, Rose, I hear you.
And Tyler's chilling over
Okay.
here.
All right, Tyler. Well, let's get started then. We'll open the meeting and we'll do it with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. So if everyone would, in their place, say, I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first is the listing of the hearing of citizens, and I'm not aware anyone requested it. Angela Jones, was there any requests? I assume we have the capability if someone was to do that now, but I think it's unlikely that we do. So I'll just say, are there any citizens who wish to be heard at this point?
John?
Yes.
There were no citizens that contacted me to speak this evening.
Do we have the capability, if there had been, or if there is someone out there listening to us, that we could engage them?
The way we have it set up now is they're required to contact me by email by 3 p.m. on Monday.
Okay.
But if you'd like to do that in the future, we can.
Well, we won't worry about that now, Angela. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, preliminary budget and projections. Brian?
All right, thank you. As we discussed last month, this is a pretty conventional budget year, and we're doing the best we can to kind of work through where we are with the budget based on current information, which seems to change daily as things develop through this crisis. So tonight we're going to start off with Ian Tyson, who is here with us from PFM. He put together our projections for the next couple of years and several scenarios. He's going to review those, and then I'll close out with a review of where we are with the budget right now and what we're recommending for the preliminary budget, what we're recommending be adopted by the board this month. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ian.
Thanks, Brian. And should I share my screen here, or is someone on your end going to work the slides?
I'll leave that up to Don.
Ian, go ahead and share the slides. You have that capability.
Yep. Give me 1 second. So good evening, everyone. My name is Ian Tyson. I'm with Public Financial Management. I'm part of the technical assistance team from the Department of Education that works with Erie Public Schools on the planning and development of the financial improvement plan. I've been working with Brian and his team since 2016, so I am very familiar with the Erie Public School District budget. And as part of my background, I've been doing this with PFM for about 5 years now. So we'll start off with just some more general information on the budget, and then dive into some of the details on the projections. But where we are starting is with the proposed budget that Brian will share with you in a little bit more detail later. It's about $203 million in total for both revenues and expenditures. About a third of your revenues come from local sources, so that would be your real estate taxes, your earned income taxes, and a handful of other sources. And then about another 2/3 of your budget come from the state, with the largest share being basic education funding. On the expenditure side, the biggest slice of this pie is for salaries and benefits. That's not uncommon for school districts. Anywhere in the range from 60 to 75% of the budget is typically spent on salaries. And this is just because it requires a lot of individuals to educate children, teachers in the classroom, custodians and maintenance staff maintaining the buildings, administrators, instructional assistants. All these would be categorized under these blue slices here. Some of the other major parts of the budget would be the amount of money that goes to supporting other schools. So largest share here would be the students enrolled in charter schools. And some of these other tuition payments would be for like students placed in special education settings outside the district. So in terms of fixed costs for the district, the majority of the budget is actually tied up in either personnel, tuition, debt service, and just a small slice would be considered something that would be more along the lines of not quite discretionary, but something that you'd have a little bit an easier time of controlling them in year-to-year basis. So, as Brian mentioned at the top of this presentation, we're living in some pretty unique times here. Since the situation is changing so rapidly, a lot of this planning exercise we know will be outdated as soon as we finish it. So this will require a lot of flexibility and ability to take a look at multiple scenarios in order to make sure that we are accounting for everything that we know based on what we know today. So as many of you know, the CARES Act, the Corona Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, has a portion of money coming through the K-12 Education Stabilization Fund and a couple of other sources. So Erie will receive some money from the federal government to cover some of those one-time expenses from the coronavirus response. Right now, the idea is that this money is one time. So there might be future rounds of federal funding that we might account for. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that that particular pot of money coming from the relief fund is more or less money in, money coming out. This is not intended to replace any loss of revenue. That would have to come from future rounds of funding. Some of a lot of organizations like us and PASBO have been trying to take a look at what's the likely impact of all these changes on local finances. So here we have the estimates that PASBO had put together the other week for Erie Public Schools. So under their range, when they were looking at I guess a baseline and a pessimistic scenario for what might happen for local finances, they were estimating a decrease of $3.5 to $4.5 million for Erie's local revenues. And the budget that we're looking at right now for the proposed budget, we were going with a middle of the road scenario. So we had looked at a couple of different ways where those revenues might trend. And our pessimistic scenario, the worst case scenario, was in that range from PASBO. But right now, what we're working with the projections is the middle of the road. So that's somewhere around a $2.5 million decline in your local revenues. So here we have a couple of the likely impacts for some of your revenue sources where we know based on past behavior where we might see them. So again, as I said earlier, this is going to require a lot of flexibility and planning. So right now, I would say based on what I've seen in the projections and in my talk with Brian and his team, I would say Erie's probably going to be okay for next year. The budget that we're looking at is not something where we would say that you need to come back and take a closer look at expenditure cuts. I think the way that Brian and his team have put together this budget, I feel like this would be okay for next year. But again, we will be working with Brian and his team to sort of monitor that over time. So as we get more information, as those revenues come in, we'll come back and we'll adjust our projections and see if we need to go higher or lower on some of them. So here I'll just run through some of the different revenue assumptions that we have. We'll come back and show these in a more visual style later in the presentation. But right now, these are all written here on the slide. So I think the biggest takeaways from here would be at the top. Right now, we're assuming no increases in the real estate tax rate. And on the state aid side, we're assuming, as in the 2021 budget, that the allocations for basic education funding and special education funding, so the biggest slices of the district's revenue, those would be flat for next year, 2021. And then after that, we'd sort of see a return to growth. On the salary side, we're showing no salary increase where there are wage reopeners in the bargaining agreements. We'll show a couple of other scenarios where that changes. We assume that healthcare benefits, they continue to grow at their historical rates, and also that there is a slight increase in the number of students who are enrolled in charter schools. So taking that all together, in the baseline, which is where we like to start off with our analysis. So this is assuming a steady state status quo, nothing changes. So here in the chart or in the chart and the table, these yellow bars, these are the annual deficits. Blue bars would be the fund balance, so the money that you have in reserve. And down here we have a breakout of the revenues and expenditures. So over time, starting with the balanced 2021 proposed budget, that gap opens up in the projections. So we start off with a slight negative deficit of less than $1 million, and that continues to grow until we get out here 5 years. One of the things that makes it a little bit easier to see the difference in what's happening is if you take out the transfer in capital funds. So right now, the 2021 proposed budget has a transfer of about $2.6 million for capital. Once you pull that out of the projections, you can sort of see the growth in the deficit over time. Actually, it shrinks a little bit because there's no growth in the salaries. But this gap persists. What this tells me is that there isn't really an easy way to grow out of this problem. I would describe that as. So here we have, based on all the assumptions that we're loading into the baseline status quo projection, revenues or expenditures are growing faster than revenues. So here over on a year-to-year basis, we're projecting expenditures to grow by about 2% per year, whereas revenues are growing by 1.3%. So that's why this gap is up and does not really close itself. In the financial improvement plan, there are a couple of initiatives that are intended to help close that gap over time. Here in the second bullet, so in the 2021 budget, we are continuing with the operational efficiencies for the district's custodians engineers. So that means that these projections assume that all those positions stay in-house. There's no outsourcing here. The other initiatives that we have in here are the impact of the tax-exempt properties, so the payments and lower taxes, charter school stabilization, so that increase in enrollment over time, that gets cut in half from 60 to 30. and then the planned tax increases at 2.46% each year. And that would be starting in the year after the proposed budget. So coming back here on the financial improvement plan, this assumes no tax increase for the 2021 budget, and then tax increases starting in the following year, plus the stabilization in the charter school enrollment. And again, as we talked about with the baseline, this is before we include salary increases. So over time, that stabilization in the charter schools, and then also regular 2.46% tax increases, those deficits that we saw over time, they turned into small surpluses here. So here with the tax increases and that stabilization on the expenditure side, your budget is more or less imbalanced for the foreseeable future. And it actually grows over time. So to me, that tells me that revenues are growing faster than expenditures now. So we'll talk a little bit about those major pieces of the assumptions here and how they might change over time, particularly as we revisit this over the next couple of months. So here, the biggest driver on your local side is your tax base for real estate taxes. So if we think back to that slide about the impact of the coronavirus on your finances, you can think of revenues as made up of a formula that's the tax base times the tax rate times the collection rate. So here we're going to focus on the tax base part of your real estate taxes. So here we have the trends over time. You can sort of see this U-shaped trend in your real estate tax base. So assessed value decline over time, and then it sort of picks back up as those LRTA agreements, the property tax exemption programs for new construction. As the effect of those starts to you start to see those in the assessed value trend. So you see the decrease, and as those properties come back onto the tax rolls, you can see it pick up again. Here for the projections, we're going to assume that U-shaped trend continues. Again, we'll revisit this as we get more information about the current round that's in effect. But here in this dotted blue line, these are the trends that we're showing in the background for our projections. So over the next couple of months, and as we get more information about what's the likely impact of all these changes of the new normal, we're going to look at these areas. So things like, how does the impact of construction slow down? How does that impact the LRTA properties and other properties for this year and future years? One of the things that is a typical response to a downturn like what we're seeing right now is in the future, there's an uptick in assessment appeals for the valuation of properties. And then again, how those trends are change over time for that construction that's under the LRTA program. The other piece of that equation for real estate taxes and other local taxes is the collection rate. So here we're going back to 2006-07, before the impact of the Great Recession. And one thing that I would just like to point out here is that this information can be a little bit noisy, especially for Erie, where you have made some changes on your policies for real estate tax collections. So part of this would be changes in the economy, and I think part of these jumps would also be changes in that collection policy. So here, what I just want to draw our attention to is that over the past couple of years, you had seen an increase in your collection rate. So that means that you see higher current taxes, and in the future, you'd see lower delinquent taxes. Right now, for the budget, we're assuming a decrease in that collection rate. So here we see the drop from 1920 over to the proposed budget for 2021-22. You see this 87% is still higher than where we were back in 2006-07. So again, is this one of those areas of uncertainty as we're going into planning for next year? This could drop even further. one of the calculations that I did before we jumped on today was looking at what would happen if this 87% went down to the 85%, and that's about another $1 million revenue loss for next year. So as I said in the beginning, the scenario that we're looking at right now is the middle of the road. So what happens if we see a decline in local sources? What does that look like? That's sort of halfway between what we saw for last year and the impact of the Great Recession. So for the projections, we're also assuming that it takes a couple of years for the economic recovery. So we're assuming that that lower collection rate stays stable for a couple of years before you come back to the 88.7% that you saw in 2018-19. The other major slice of your local revenues is your Act 511 taxes. So this is your earned income tax, your local services tax, and your real estate transfer tax. Here we can also see the impact of the Great Recession on those collections. So in the year or two after the Great Recession, over $1.5 million you lost from these revenue sources. And then, as you can see over time, it took you about 10 or 11 years before you're back up to the $8 or so million in revenues from these sources. So one of the areas that we're going to come back and revisit with Brian and his team over the next couple of months are, one, what can we expect for the last couple of months for 1920? So is this the number that we're going to end the current year on? And then is this are we being too conservative? Are we not being conservative enough for next year's budget? So right now we're looking at a $700,000 decrease in Act 511 taxes for next year. But again, as we see here, there's the potential that this could be even an even steeper decline. The other large slice of your budget, or your revenue budget, comes from basic education funding. Right now, we're assuming that for next year, 2021, we're going to see flat allocations for basic education and special education funding. This is another area of uncertainty. The coronavirus is impacting school districts across the Commonwealth, but also the Commonwealth's budget. There's been some reports from the state's independent fiscal office that they're trying to wrap their heads around what the impact of that means for the current year and also going into next year. So I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty over the next couple of weeks about what that means in terms of school district funding for next year. So right now, to be on the conservative side, we're assuming just a flat allocation for next year. So we're not including the proposed increase that was in Governor Wolf's proposed budget for basic education and special education funding. So we'll come back and revisit that as we get more information from the Commonwealth. But over time, there's two key factors in what that means for growth for Erie and other school districts across the Commonwealth. So the first is the students, the number of students that are enrolled in district and charter schools. As we talked about at the December board retreat, over time, Erie's seen a decrease in its enrollment, so total student population over time. So over time, that will feed its way back into the calculation of the basic education funding formula, where new money is going through and getting allocated to students based on their demographics. And then the other part of that equation is the Commonwealth's ability to fund those increases. So right now, it's a little bit unclear what this means for the current year, but depending on how long this lasts and how long it takes for the recovery to take place, that would also impact the Commonwealth's ability to put additional money through that funding formula. The other driver on the expenditure side of the budget are charter schools. So this is the number of students who are enrolled in those schools, and then also the calculation of that tuition rate. So here what we're looking at is a chart of the district's historical tuition payments. So this is the total each year. And this line, the dotted line, or the solid black line, that's the percentage of students, the estimated percentage of students who are enrolled in charter schools. So here, starting off with the 2021 budget, these light blue shades, these are the projected tuition costs under that stabilization scenario, where 30 students per year, the increase in enrollment is about 30 students per year. And then if that does not occur, if we go back to the baseline of 60, that would be this additional yellow bar on top of that. So here we can see as the number of students increases over time, that percentage of students in those charter schools increases. So tuition costs are made up of the number of students who are enrolled in charter schools, and then also the tuition rate that the district pays per student. So over the last couple of years, the historical numbers that we have, Erie's tuition growth was about a little bit under 7% per year. That's driven by the increase in the number of students, but then also that tuition cost. And the tuition cost is mostly determined by the district's cost. So as spending in the district goes up for things like salaries, benefits, but then also for charter school tuition, that also drives that tuition number that's paid out per student higher. So it's harder for the district to control the number of students who are enrolled in charter schools. That's up to the parents to decide where they are going to enroll their students. But over time, this is a number that needs to be tracked, and which is what we're doing through this process of doing budget projections. We're trying to keep an eye on what these trends look like and how does that translate into the district's budget. And if you think back to our pie chart at the beginning of this presentation, about 64% of your total spending for next year was on, is expected to be on salaries and benefits for employees. So like every other school district in the state, those salary and benefits costs are largely driven by the collective bargaining process. So when you come back to the table with your teachers and support staff, those decisions about step increases, co-pays, deductibles, all those feed into your growth in costs or your changing costs over time. So right now in the baseline projections, we're assuming that we in the financial improvement plan scenario, we did not include salary increases. In a couple of minutes, I'll show what a 1% and 2% growth looks like. But the biggest takeaway from doing this exercise with the current situation that we're under is that Erie is going to have to take a close look at what was affordable given its financial situation when evaluating some of those proposals for salary increases in future rounds of bargaining. So here, if we go back and we think about the financial improvement plan scenario, each year we had a small but growing surplus for the next 5 years. Once we take the salary number and we grow that by 1% per year, now we're back to seeing those deficits appear again. So in each of those years under the financial improvement plan scenario, we saw a positive number here, and that fund balance grew over time. So as that 1% salary increase factors into the projections, that deficit grows over time. So to me, that says that over time, if you want to afford that 1% increase, we have to look at two things. One is either faster revenue growth, which come from a higher real estate tax increase if revenues from the Commonwealth do not grow more quickly than we anticipate. Or the other side of the equation is how can we control those costs, and how can we control the growth in costs to make sure that this is a little bit more balanced over time. And again, even with this 1% salary increase, at the end of the 5 years, there's still a small surplus left, but we're a lot lower than we were when we started here in 2021. In previous versions of these projections, one of the things that we looked at or that we assumed was a regular 2% salary increase each year. So again, with the change in the financial circumstances for local revenues and also for state revenues because of the coronavirus, it looks like that situation has changed over the past couple of months. So here, once you factor that into the projections, now we're back down to what was similar to that steady state baseline scenario. So we're seeing a complete exhaustion of the district's fund balance out in year 4 of the projections and steadily growing deficits each year. So on the last note is just that I wanted to end here is that the fund balance is a tool that you can use to balance your budget in any given year. And I mean, in a time of uncertainty like now, these reserves are here for a rainy day, and it's pouring outside. So if we need to, we can draw on those. But the thing to keep in mind is that fund balance number, you can only use that once. So coming back here, unless we see surpluses in those out years, that fund balance will continue to decline. So maintaining those reserve levels is important to the long-term health of the district. The district has a fund balance policy to maintain a minimum number, but then this is also just a financial best practice, just so that you can reduce your exposure to one-time drops in revenues like we're seeing now, or spikes in expenditures. But this also has a real impact on your budget. When we looked at this back in December for the board retreat, we looked at what were the borrowing costs for the district if you went out and you issued a whole series of bonds for that phase 2 of your facilities plan. So the 130 million or so remaining in capital projects that you would need to do after your current round is completed. What would happen if you took out some bonds to cover that whole $130 million? And back then, a couple of months ago, we were looking at a change in 0.25% for the interest rate. That translated into $200,000 per year on an annual basis, and $4.1 million over a 20-year bond payment. So that's a real impact to your budget. And one of those key factors that those rating agencies look at when they evaluate the financial health of the district when you're issuing bonds is that fund balance number. So that's the end of my presentation. But Brian, if I'm more than welcome to stay on and handle any questions that people might have after that.
Ian, you used the word noisy on that second driver slide. Just help me understand. Is that a synonym for like volatile?
Yes.
Okay. I just hadn't heard that.
Ian, I have a question for you. If we could go back to driver 1.
Yep.
Where we're talking
Let me
about.
go back and share my slide again. Back here for the assessed value.
For the assessed value. So in this projection, are we looking at any of the potential LRTA that has already been invested? Won't we be getting a 20% revenue on the commercial LRTA? And would that have been reflected in these numbers? Or am I inaccurate in that assumption?
No, so I think that's a good point. So right now Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're still trying to figure out like what is the impact of that that new construction. I mean, we have the dollar value for what's being invested in the community, but how that translates into an assessed value is a little bit unclear. So right now we're not accounting for that in the projection. So I would say that this is probably too conservative of an estimate. So this is something that we're going to come back to as we get better information on that.
Well, that's good news that it's conservative. Thank you.
Yeah, right now we do know that there's a lot of construction out there, and the estimated construction costs, the assessment department has not converted any of that into assessed value at this point. So again, as Ian said, we're going to continue to monitor that, and as we start to get those estimates in, we'll adjust this.
So I'm just kind of hopeful that with some of the properties that might end up being reassessed, that maybe with these properties commercial, that it might balance out. I'm just hopeful.
Yeah, and that'll be a pretty significant impact to your budget if this line sort of straightens out instead of decreases.
Ian, I have a couple questions.
Yep.
For the PSERS, what is the current percentage of our gross pay that we have to contribute? And has that leveled off yet? Because I remember in the past it was supposed to reach a peak and then level off.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think that's also a good point to bring up some of the uncertainty that we're facing right now. So I'm just going to go back and think it's about 34, 35% that you're paying on a gross basis for your salaries. And every year in December, PSERS updates like a 5-year forward-looking estimate. So right now, the projections we're just using PSERS rates from December, knowing that those are going to change over time. So everyone's seen the volatility in the stock market. Right now, your rates are set for next year for 2020, 21. But I don't think that we know enough to figure out what that's going to mean for the following year, for 21, 22. But if anything, it means that those rates are going to go up.
Okay. The other question is, it seems, granted, we really don't know how the budget is going to end up exactly, but we have a very good handle on it. In your opinion, do you think we still need our stated main financial advisor, or do you think we can get rid of this?
I don't think that I can. I don't think that I can answer that in my capacity.
Let me take that one, Ian. Ian actually works for the state directly, so I can kind of give you my thoughts on that, Tom. I think pre-COVID that we were, based on our finances, we're heading down a path where we could potentially have asked to leave financial recovery here at least by the end of the year. However, when we look at Ian's projections now, it's going to be very difficult for us to show a balanced budget throughout the projection period, which is one of the key indicators for us to actually get out of financial recovery. So I think probably at least until we have a better handle on how this actually impacts our budget and what the long-term impact is going to be, we're going to be stuck with the financial administrator, at least for the time being.
And Tom, just go back to your previous question about the contribution rates for PSERS. Here, I'm pulling up what the board adopted back in December. So here we got the 34.5% for the coming school year. And then they were assuming that there still would be a steady increase over the next couple of years.
Wow, that's crazy. All right, thank you.
I have a few questions.
Go ahead, Sumner.
Ian, what would the reimbursement to the schools throughout the state, what percentage of the state budget would that be?
That's a good question. And I should probably have that off the top of my head, but I don't.
I assume it's significant.
Yeah, it's usually in the range of like 15 to 20% of a state budget.
Okay, because here's my concern. They obviously have taken a huge hit to their income. I think it's way over optimistic to even predict us to be flat this year. I think we're going to be facing a cut just because they're going to be cutting everywhere, trying not to raise taxes. And, we're a big part of the budget. So I'm not comfortable with an assumption that we're going to be flat. And the other big, huge concern I have, and we've discussed this before among us, is we don't know if we're going to be opening the schools in the fall or if we're going to be doing it by distance learning. And I don't know if the state's going to dictate that or if they're going to leave it up to the districts. Certainly Philadelphia is having a bigger problem than the rest of the state. But that is also a huge issue. Have you heard anything on that, Ian, as to what the governor is thinking or?
Yeah, so I guess to take that in two parts, at the beginning of the month when we were putting together the proposed budget, Brian and I and his team, we did take a look at what that worst case scenario would be. And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we also did look at a decrease in state aid and what that would mean for the budget.
Yes.
So I think, Sumner, that I think you're right. That is a real possibility, especially as we're trying to think through what is the state budget going to be for next year. So I think you're right. This is another area we're going to have to come back to over the next couple of weeks as we plan for this. But then to your other question about the plan for reopening and what school looks like for next year, I haven't heard anything in terms of concrete guidance from the state on that.
And we have to approve our budget fairly quickly here, right?
we have till June 30th to approve the budget. So, but what we're hearing now is that the state is starting to get into that budget deliberation process. So again, assuming they stick to their own deadline of June 30th, by the time we have to adopt our final budget, we should know what our state subsidy will be for the upcoming school year.
But are they giving you any indication of whether we'll be opening in the fall? Or, I mean, obviously it's a huge impact on the budget. If we plan learning, it's a totally, we'd have all kinds of layoffs.
Sumner, I do know that the Secretary of Ed announced today that the plan right now for the state is to be opening back up in the fall, but that was just new today, and that obviously can
Okay.
change depending upon whether or not we have another rebound or another spike. So I'm sure that it's as situations go along and we're looking at, different counties in different phases, that seems to be the plan from the state, but that is what they said today.
And internally, we've started talking about next year and what that might look like. Right now, we've concluded that we need to be flexible through next year, because even if we do open, if we do shift to the red phase, the schools are going to be shutting down. If we do have, some COVID, people test positive in our schools with COVID, we'll have to shut those particular schools down. So right now, what we're talking about is an instructional approach next year that could seamlessly transition between face-to-face learning and online. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is we're not sure if we're going to be allowed to bring all the students back into the schools, or if they're going to require caps on the number of students that are there. Are we going to have to take a look at some type of scheduling of the students coming in and out of the buildings at different times to reduce social the size of the gathering? So those are all things that are up in the air at this point. We'll continue to monitor. It's our and they have provided guidance so far. It's our hope that they'll continue to provide us guidance so that we can continue to modify that plan as we get closer to the start of the school year.
Brian, I'd like to make a suggestion for the board to look at and for the administration to potentially look at. I know we're not looking at any tax increase this year because obviously a lot of people are hurting, financially greatly hurting. However, then we are in a situation where the following year we're going to have to raise taxes 2.46% at a time when people could still be hurting greatly. And so I'm wondering if we shouldn't be considering raising taxes 0.5% for this year and then looking at reevaluating next year that potentially we would not raise that 2.46% because people will still not financially be on their feet. So it's just something that I want to suggest to you to possibly consider.
We can, and I think Ian's still on, we can probably run that scenario and share that with you at the committee of the whole next month as an item for discussion.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, that would be no problem.
Okay. Ian, if you let me share my screen, I have that scenario with the flat BEF and SEF. If we want to pull that.
Tyler, I don't know if I could I just wanted to ask one follow-up question regarding the collection policy that was alluded to during the presentation, just saying that the collection policy may impact, will have an impact. Could you just explain what you meant, just so I could better understand there?
So I think, are you referring to that slide with the percent, the real estate tax collection rate?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's two things going on here. The biggest driver of that is going to be people's ability to pay for that. So I mean, we all know that people are hurting right now. So the amount of money that's coming in terms of real estate taxes that are paid on time, that drives that collection rate. So I think what we'll probably see over the next couple of months is that's bound to decrease. We're just not sure how far. But in future years, you would pick up some of that lost revenue today through the delinquent tax collections over time.
that was, I guess, my question, and that might be one more for Jen regarding just our policy. And I'm worried, it being too punitive in nature, and just how that would roll out, and how that would impact our community, as I heard, like Dar had suggested or stated, that we're going to be in tough times. So I
Yeah.
don't want to, like, double wham families who are struggling.
Mhm. And I mean, I think that is something that a lot of places are considering. Some places are considering either extending the discount period or waiving penalties if you pay late. I mean, that is a real thing that you could offer to your community there.
Yeah, I do. So we did take a look at that, and we still don't have a lot of flexibility as far as extending out the face period, just because of the school code and the requirement that those get turned over after a certain number of months. However, we're hearing that there is legislation being proposed down in Harrisburg to give us some more flexibility for the upcoming school year. So if that happens, it's certainly something that we as a district should consider. And then I have up on the screen, Ian, I think I don't know if you want to walk them through this. This, I think, is for Mr. Nichols, the worst case scenario projection.
Yeah, so this would be the plan scenario. So the second one that we looked at with the tax increases, with the small surpluses, combined with a 2% salary increase. So here you can see with that plus flat BEF and SEF allocations for the next 5 years. This really slows your growth in revenues, but then also you can see as those expenditures continue to grow, those deficits get fairly large over time.
Ian, during the Great Recession, didn't they actually cut those payments at one time? I know our district had a major dislocation because of a reduction in state funding over that period of time. I don't know what the percentage of cut, but wasn't it actually reduced?
Yep, that's right.
How much was it reduced? Because this is a more immediate economic impact than even that was. Did it go down 3-4%? I don't know.
Let me the slide from last time. I don't know if you recall on at the last meeting, we talked about what happened in 2008-9 with the stimulus money. Just give me a minute to pull this up.
I mean, it's the normal thing that happens. We actually approve our budget, and the state is still going back and forth on what they are going to give us, and we don't know that till like August, something like that. We have no.
This happened in the past. The last few years, they've adopted the budget on time. So this is what I shared last time, and again, the bottom right here shows what happened to basic ed subsidy at Northeast, but the trend line is the same for pretty much every school district across the state. There was subsequent rounds of stimulus money that came through the state and was supposed to be passed on to the school district. And what they did at that point was use it to actually reduce the state share of the basic ed funding. And they pushed in the federal funding to balance that out and artificially increase the BEF during that time period. And then when the state or the federal funding ran out, they dropped it back down. So that was the drop you saw. But really, what that did was bring it back to 2008, 2009 levels pre-recession. So I think, in looking at that, and again, we're making a lot of assumptions, and they change by the hour sometimes. I think that, worst case scenario, assuming that they get some support from the federal government, that we could see that level funding for the foreseeable future.
Do you have more on this, Brian?
I do.
Okay.
Before I transition over, I just want to thank Ian for coming today and presenting for us. His guidance and support here over the last couple of years has been invaluable. And because of his work, we do have these wonderful projections that really help us identify our challenges long before they turn into crisis issues. And we're quickly able to adapt and adjust, which is something that's much different this time around as compared to our last financial crisis. So Ian, thank you very much for your support throughout this.
Yeah, thank you, and I'm glad and happy to work with you, and I'm sure I'll be back talking in front of you all, the board, over the next couple of months.
That's right.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Ian.
Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen now, just to go over what we're proposing for this year's budget, for the preliminary budget that the board needs to adopt in May. So this is, again, a summary. We have the budget book completed, and we'll get that up on the website here probably in the next day or so. We have the 1920 estimate as well as the 2021 budget, and you can see that what we have proposed for this, the preliminary budget, is a balanced budget. So we have 203 million in revenues and 203 million in expenses, maintaining the $12.8 million fund balance. And what's different compared to last month is we made a couple changes based on some things that have changed in the interim in the revenues and expenses. But the big difference here is if you recall, we had a $7.6 million transfer scheduled for the capital projects, and we were intending to use those funds to expand the work that we were going to do at Erie High. We're proposing that for this year, at this point, that we reduce that proposed transfer to $2.6 million. So that's by $5 million, which would effectively balance our budget for this year without the tax increase. By doing that, I do also want to point out that that does not mean that we're reducing the phase one construction work, the 80.8 million that the board already approved. We have the funds available to do all of that work without making any of the transfers for this year. So with that, again, I just want to point out that, again, being in the crisis this time is a lot different than it was last time. As I pointed out last month, we do have some reserves that we could tap into. The proposal that we have here tonight, you can see, only hits one of those reserve line items. That's the transfer to capital projects. We still have some additional reserves that we could theoretically use to balance the budget. One, if things get worse than we project for 2021, and two, if it extends into 21, 22. So we do have, again, a little more flexibility. Certainly that would be last case scenario. As Ian pointed out, we still have reserves that are below what best practices are. And, we've been fortunate over the last couple years that things have turned in our favor, and we were able to start to build back up some of those reserves that we've lost over the last 10 years. And we certainly don't want to get into a point where we've tapped out all of those and are in the same situation we were a couple of years ago. So with that, again, as Ian mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. We're making our best guess today in bringing you this recommendation. I'm certain that's going to change by the time we bring you the updated or proposed final budget in June. And we do also anticipate that circumstances will continue to change and change rapidly over the next year to 24 months. So with that in mind, our plan at this point is really based on the best information we have available in June, is to adopt a budget using that But this is going to be a lot different than prior budgets where we finalize a budget in June and just move ahead and move ahead with all those plans. Because of all the uncertainty, we're going to have to continue to monitor our local revenues, at least on a monthly basis, to make sure that they're coming in as projected and adjust our plans accordingly. And because of that, one of the other things that we'll be doing next year is taking any discretionary spending that we do have built into the plan. That's the two examples I have up here now are the remaining $2.6 million in capital project transfers and some of those curriculum purchases, and pushing them off towards the end of the year, so that it will just give us a little more flexibility if things start to turn worse than we anticipate, to end the year with a balanced budget. That's all I have on the budget at this point. Is there any questions?
Brian,
Yes.
this is Gwen. I have and looking over it, how many incarcerated youth are we paying for?
I don't know the answer to that. Neil, do you have that off the top of your head?
Yeah, I believe that right now, I think there's, in actual prison, there's 8. As far as the number of juveniles who are in detention centers, that number I do not know off the top of my head.
All right, because I was just wondering. And then what rentals do we have? You said there's a 14-15% difference.
You're talking about building rentals?
I don't know, the budget just had rentals. Do we have budget rentals that we're utilizing?
Is that, Gwen, was that under the income or the expenses?
That was under income.
So let me see if I can pull that up quickly.
Well,
we do have building rentals that we typically get, I believe, and maybe John can weigh on this quicker than I can, that we reduced that for next year just because of the circumstances. We didn't feel that we were going to continue to be able to rent out our facilities to large groups.
Okay, that's fine. That's good then. I'll take it. Thank you.
Hi, this is John. Sorry if things are getting a little loud here, but yeah, we knocked that down. We had been doing pretty good and getting about $150,000 a year in rentals, and we knocked that down to 50 for the coming year. So that is in there.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Anything else on the budget?
If there's no more questions, I just want to make sure if the board is comfortable with this approach for the preliminary budget, we can move ahead and get that on the agenda for next week as proposed.
I think that's the way to go, Brian.
I'm comfortable with it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Online instruction update, Teresa.
Thanks, John. I'm just going to report out a few numbers and then update on our outreach efforts. So we are 13 days into our planned instruction phase. And actively over those 13 days, we've had 9,075 active users consistently in Google Classroom. And just to add to that number, those numbers don't include our students who are in credit recovery and cyber. So we do have additional students who are engaged in the education. So that's good news. As far as our outreach goes, to connect with the other students that we haven't engaged in Google Classroom yet, we have teachers, administration, support staff, blue coats calling and visiting homes, 2 families who are not engaged, and we also added to our current procedure for obtaining technology. We are, in addition to having families call in, we are developing lists at the buildings of families who are indicating that technology is an obstacle for them. So we're getting that information, and we have extra secretaries in the IT department who are reaching out to those families to set up Chromebook distribution or internet hotspots if needed. And we also have the tech support still running, which is epssupport.org, and that is for staff, students, and families. I know the board was concerned about some of our populations, and I do have a report out on EL, and Angie Kanaki will follow up with special ed in a minute. We have engaged about 87% of our EL population online, and there are an additional about 27 to 28 families who have opted for the paper packet options because they do not want technology in their home. And we're continuing to review those on a case-by-case basis. So things seem to be moving right along. We'll be at the half point at around May 12th. So we're hoping to gather some more specific data and information as to how students are doing moving forward. Any questions?
Mr. President?
Go ahead, darling.
Teresa, I neglected to ask this last month. What about our homeless population? How are we working with them?
Chandra was reaching out to those families. I don't have an exact report on that, Dar, but I can get it for you.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. President.
Gwen.
Teresa, I had a grandmother contact me today. Her granddaughter was taking classes at Gannon, and then when COVID-19 came, she's wondering how are they going to be able to finish their classes and they're not having any access with the people at Gannon.
The courses at Gannon continued. Gwen, can we touch base afterwards and I can get the name so I can check on that?
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else for Teresa on online instruction?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Lori.
Go ahead, Lori.
Hi, so Teresa, I have a question. I have a senior student who contacted me. Now she said she got a report card and she failed a class third quarter, and she wants to know, what does she do? So what's going to be the next move for her?
She's a senior, Lori?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually reviewed the list of students who failed a course in the first 3 quarters, and we are reaching out to them to set them up in credit recovery so we can get them on a pathway to be able to graduate by the end of the year. So calls for that should be going out probably in the next day or so.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Erie High School esports bid, Neil.
Yep. So as Brian alluded to in his update last week, we opened up the bids for the esports lab at Erie High. And so I'm sharing with you just the summary again, just so that everybody is aware. We put out for bid 3 contracts: the general construction, the HVAC, and the electrical. We had 7 bids for the general construction, 3 for HVAC, and 4 for the electric. The total price for all of the renovations, at least for the base bid, wound up being about $640,000. We, in looking at what was proposed in the alternate bids and talking with our architect, we're recommending that there be 3 alternates accepted: the windows, the site paving, and Johnson Controls, which is a building management system that will help run the HVAC construction. So just overall, just the idea behind this is there's a room off the back of the library at Erie High that was a big meeting area that was just being used for that. Before the 1920 school year, the district received a $500,000 grant, the advancing grant, the PA Smart Grants, to advance computer technology, coding, and what they call esports. And so with that grant, we allotted what was about $100,000 towards the creation of these esports labs. So in working with the architects, it didn't make sense to go in and renovate this room before doing the major construction at Erie High, only to go in, fix a room, and then when they go in and do the bigger project, have to undo and all the work that they had already done. So the thought was that we would release this now so that we can utilize those grant funds to help offset the overall cost of the project and still push forward the bigger goal of renovating Erie High School. That's the thing, is that this space was slated for renovations when we do the big project at Erie High. So it kind of made sense because they did not push back the deadline for the spending down of this money. And so we were kind of stuck between two things. So we pushed ahead with the project. And so that's kind of how we ended up with the overall cost of about $800,000.
And Neil, we can accomplish what we want to there, and we won't regret it when the bigger project is underway.
We definitely can accomplish this, and we will not regret it. Some of the things that they're putting in as far as the HVAC is concerned, they're changing it for that room. But then when we do the bigger project, then we could take the building facility and change it from a steam building to a hot water. The mechanics are already in there, so it would be a matter of setting up new pipes that go to the machine. And so this is literally like a half step towards the bigger renovation costs that's going to happen at Erie High.
I had faith that you were on it. I just wanted to hear you.
Thanks, John.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes.
Before we move on to item 6, can we back up and do item 4, students assistance?
I don't see that on my printout, but sure, Brian.
Okay. Angie?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry I'm not joining by video. Those of you who Zoom with me frequently know that my Wi-Fi is sketchy, so I don't want to put any more stress on it than I needed to. So I'm just joining you by audio tonight. But just to follow up a little bit on what Teresa was saying with the update on the instructional plan with special ed, we've been following the plan that we presented at the last board meeting. We're using the Google Classroom primarily and a co-teach model where our special ed teachers are adapting and modifying content for our students with special needs. We're also using paper packets for some students, where that's more appropriate. We're using teletherapy to deliver our related services. And that's working out pretty well. We're using either by phone and or a video platform. And to engage our families, we're basically using any platform that they're comfortable with. So we've been using Google Meet, we've been using Zoom, we've been using WhatsApp and all kinds of different platforms that we weren't even familiar with before we embarked on this. So we're just trying to reach out to our families any way that we can. And, I think we're getting better at it. Every time we have a meeting with staff, we seem to be doing more with the families and engaging them more. But we do continue to reach out to the families regarding their techniques over and above what the district is doing, because we feel that's really important for us to try to make sure that all of our families are engaging in instruction. So we have our teachers reaching out even over and above what the district is doing with regard to making sure our families can access instruction. So that's special ed. Does anybody have any questions specifically in regard to that? Okay, then I'll move on to the SAP program. So our guidance counselors and mental health specialists and our behavior specialists, they've been in frequent communication with our students since the shutdown, but we felt that we needed a more coordinated effort. So we did reconvene. We've had our buildings reconvene their SAP teams so that we're have a more coordinated approach. So whenever our teachers are engaging with our students or other staff are engaging with the students, if any issues come up that the staff team needs to address, they can relay that to the appropriate staff, and they can meet and determine who the best support is to engage the family and the student, and and address their needs. We've also revised our suicide prevention and crisis plan protocol so that it's more appropriate to our needs in a remote setting. And we've shared that with staff so they have guidance if any student expresses any kind of, self-harm ideation or any other mental health need is relayed, that teachers and staff know what the protocol is and they know what to do in order to assist that student and that family. It might involve a community referral, or it might involve engaging in individual and or group interventions with our staff. So we're just trying to, meet those needs the best that we can in this setting. Any questions with that?
Angie, I do have a question. What about our students that were SAP'd before COVID-19 happened and we closed the schools? How have we followed up on those students?
Yeah, we have not dropped that. Those students, our staff continue to follow up with them, in the remote. Sorry. Sorry about my barking dog. But our don't forget about them, and our staff continue to engage them and to provide, as much support as they could in this environment.
And are we sending out a general message to all of our families that if they are feeling in crisis, that these are the resources for them, or are we just doing that as the need happens, or as we become aware of an issue?
Both. I mean, I think Erica, something was posted on the Erica's there, right?
Yes, I'm hearing.
Yeah, Erica, we posted on our website, did we not, with regard to mental health needs, that who they could contact if they had a concern?
Yes, we did. We put that on our website. We included it in several Facebook posts, and also the most recent letter that went home from Brian included. It went home to all families, included contact information for counselors at every school.
Great, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Rose.
The letter that you sent out, was it different languages so all parents could get it and read it, the ESL population?
Yes, we did send, we posted translated letters on Facebook and our website, and we also sent translated letters in different languages to all of the community centers, the International Institute, and the MCRC as well. And also our Blue Coats have been instrumental in reaching out and delivering, letting people know where they can find that translated information, as well as Linda Capabianca right here at the district.
So you did translate the letter, and it did go out to parents, like through the mail too?
I don't believe it went out in the mail, although Linda may have. I know it was translated and put out through those other various options.
So it's safe to say that those parents did not get notification in the mail like regular parents, correct?
Well, I don't know that. I can check that for you.
We'll follow up and get an answer out for you. If it hasn't, we'll make sure that it does.
Okay.
Okay, any more for Angie and Erica on that? Any questions?
John, yeah. So I did talk to a teacher who was concerned about a child who was in the OCY system, and I'm wondering how we are I know that right now the courts are operating limitedly. But I do know that those cases are still coming before our judges, and I wondered if we have any information on that, or if you could provide some information at the next committee of the whole.
Dora, can you be? I'm not exactly sure if I understand what you're looking for.
So I've had teachers reaching out to me that they had children that were in the system, and then they were waiting for hearings actually. And they haven't heard anything since COVID-19. And so they're concerned about their students.
Oh, they're concerned that their students were in process of possibly being
process of possibly, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can. I can try to hook up with.
And I can give you more information, Angie. I can give you a call and give you more information.
Okay, sure. And I can try to get some information from the county on that.
Okay, thank you.
This is Tyler. I guess I don't have to say my last name. You know what my last name is. Sorry. I also video because my internet is also going shoddy. But what I was going to say is those fall under the McKinney-Vento Act, and so it would their caseworkers really do have access to making sure the district has it. So even if they're in limbo and their case hasn't been decided yet, the second that those kids come under any type of court process, they really would be covered under that act. So that their caseworkers should be advocating a little bit harder. So if there is anybody you're seeing, I could help, I guess, on that side too, in addition to being advocated with the school district, but I could help with that network as well.
Thanks, Tyler.
Okay, if we covered the student assistance program for now, we can move on to graduation senior recognition with B.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to first put up a screen. I'd like to share my screen with all of you. It's with let me grab it real quick. It explains some of the things that we've talked about over the weeks. And I know you've talked with Brian last time. I'm having trouble. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Super. So what we talked today again to try to finalize a few things for the virtual graduation and some of the other activities that we've been talking about for the seniors for this year. And so I just wanted to make sure we talked about what yellow status means, which will take place beginning on Friday, specifically about 25 or less in attendance, having universal masking, the temperature checks prior to entering anything that we may have, and making sure we are social distancing throughout the building if we're going to do anything. So those are the 4 key pieces that we've kept in mind as we began and worked through some of the pieces that we're going to talk about. So the first one is Erie High, including Emerson Gridley students. And so 2 things that we did say that we definitely are going to do would be on between May 12th and May 15th. In the homerooms, the students will be coming and they have it all set. And I know Brian had sent email to all of the board members with both collegiate and Erie High's information. That gives more specifics, but this is more of a broad brush that we can say that these are the things that would be happening. And at those May 12th through 15th, they would get their caps and gowns, and then they would be able to go into their locker and take all of their possessions, personal possessions that they had for the school year. For Erie High then on May 26th through the 29th, again, by homerooms, there will be a walkthrough video. It's the actual ceremony where the student goes in, receives their diploma, gets a picture via IMD, and then can walk off the stage with 2 family members per student. For collegiate, the exact same thing would happen. However, their dates would be June 1st through the 4th of receiving caps and gowns, emptying their lockers, and then June 7th having the walkthrough video, again, the ceremony in caps and gowns. again, the district would record each student receiving their diploma, and then there would be a production of a complete video of the entire graduation ceremony, featured all the students, all of the speakers, and any board member that would participate, as well as Mr. Polito, which will be made available to the parents. And then the student speeches and the traditional graduation parts. Those times and logistics are being done by the buildings, and they will be available on Friday afternoon. They will be sending it out. That's when Erie is supposed to be moving to the yellow status. All of the remainder of the activities are being discussed, and continued consultation with CDC and PDE. Some possible things that we're talking about would be a joint car procession, if possible. We are working with the city of Erie and the police department. It could include close to 600 cars. So that is being discussed, the possibility of one or the possibility of two car processions, and then possible senior celebrations at the end of the year, depending on if we're in yellow or if we're down to green, or in early fall if there's the opportunity for us to again celebrate our seniors again. We also, I listed a few things that the board can participate in specifically. One would be, if you're interested in saying a few words, we would be able, if you would let Erica know, so that she can have IMD work with you to complete that video, because then we would have your words on that video. And then if any board member would like to attend any of the walkthroughs, we would let Angela Jones know so that we can coordinate. One board member could be on stage with the superintendent and the principal in passing out the diplomas. And we will be continually having these meetings, working with both Erie High, Emerson Gridley, and Collegiate Academy to try to coordinate all of our efforts. Are there any questions?
B, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. And first of all, I want to thank you so very much for making a really good situation out of a very bad situation, and giving our students the opportunities to really celebrate as best they can in these very unprecedented and depressing times. I do want to say, though, when I look at Erie Fall and early fall, and I did mention this to Brian already, one of the big things that's going to be important in combating COVID-19 is our contact tracing. And in early fall, we would really have a difficult time doing that contact tracing if students are able to go back to college in the fall, because then they are going to have been exposed to many other people throughout the country. So I don't know if, just want to keep that in the back of your mind, or talk to the health department about how they feel about that idea of the plan. Other than that, I think it's great. The other thing I wondered about is the masking. Are we going to have something for our students that may not have masks? Even if it's just bandanas and hair ties, that they can put up, make a mask so they have something to wear when they come.
Yes, and the longer proposals Brian had shared, if you need to see them again, we can share those, but they're specific directives that would say that if they didn't have a mask, we would ensure that those students have something and have a mask that's made available. We did add the second piece. Just today, we added the part about temperatures, checking temperatures, because that is part of the yellow status. So they really shouldn't be coming in. If there is a person who has a temperature, they would not be permitted into the buildings and into the process.
And then one final thought. I think most of our students are young and resilient and not as fearful as people my age, who are at a higher risk. But are we going to have anything in place for our students that might be extremely anxious about even coming and exposing themselves to other people? Is there something that we can do for those students?
That's a great point. I think that's something that we can add to our list to ensure that students who they would contact the school, we could
Right.
work out something so that they would have, you know, not necessarily at that time, but they could receive their diploma at a different time.
Great, thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, and
it's Angela. So
Yes, sir.
I just want to say thank you to Brian and the administration. I know that as soon as we heard that we were going to be closing school, I was like bugging everyone in regards to graduation and prom. Obviously, we can't do anything about prom, but this graduation really means a lot to our students, and I'm glad that we were able to come up with some things. I know that I sent a lot of things and suggestions, and the video thing was one of the things that I suggested, as far as, because when I saw on the Facebook page that the principals were doing videos, I had text Brian and let him know that I think that would be a good idea if the board directors would send out a video, since like Darlene said, some board members are more susceptible to this COVID-19 coronavirus, and they might not want to attend in person, even if they are wearing masks. But it would be a good thing for us to be able to get our message to the students and families. I suggested that they put it right on our social media page, and wherever else they put it on our website as well, so that at least we have a chance to congratulate them as board members and participate in the graduation festivities. And some more suggestions were sent to me that I will forward to you, as far as like how other schools in the area are doing their graduation. And then I also appreciate the fact that you guys are going to be doing the yard signs and the t-shirts and things like that. I think that you guys did a great job of coming together quickly to get something figured out. And I really have to commend you for that, because although we're going through something so crazy right now in this world, for those kids to have even that little bit of graduation, even though it's not going to be what would have normally been, at least they still, feel as though they graduated. And, so I just want to say I appreciate those efforts.
Okay.
Mr. Harkins?
Yes, Gwen.
I want to say thank you to B, because y'all know as a parent of a senior, that's always been something I've mentioned. And I know we're talking about masks and things of that nature. I don't know what their budget was, but I do know seeing something on Facebook or one of the websites where they had 2020, they had face masks for the seniors pertaining, that was commemorating this quarantine, that they were making history. Food for thought.
That's a good point. When we meet next week, we'll see if there's anything, because there might be somebody that would be even willing to make some. We'll have to. I'll bring that up to the team.
I believe that.
Thank you.
I believe that Donnie at Erie High. I believe that are branded with the Erie Royals, in addition to also shirts and yard signs.
Erica, you cut out, so we didn't hear all of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I believe that at Erie High, I'm not sure about, but collegiate, but I believe at Erie High, they have ordered and/or are making masks that are kind of branded, and in addition to having shirts and yard signs.
And I will check with collegiates so we can see if they have something similar or will do something similar.
Thank you.
And B, let me know, because I have a group of sewing friends that I'm sure would be happy to help out.
Thank you.
If there's nothing more on this, the charter school enrollment cap policy with Neil.
Yep. So I'm going to share my screen again, just to bring the policy up, and I'll give everybody some background. So prior to the beginning of the 1920 school year, we didn't have a single brick and mortar charter school that had an enrollment cap. Through renewals and just negotiations on amendments to existing charter schools, starting with the 1920 school year, 3 out of the 4 of our brick and mortar charter schools now have enrollment caps. So prior to this year, a policy like this really wouldn't make any sense because there were no enrollment caps. But in looking at the fact that we now have enrollment caps on these charter schools, and knowing that we are still under the financial watch status, the policy committee team met on Thursday, April 30th, and walked through and really fleshed out this policy. So essentially, the policy is stating that while we are under financial watch status, the financial improvement plan states that we are going to wind up, that we need to stem the tide of students leaving the district and going to charter schools. And the plan calls out only having 30 students per year leave the district and go to charters. So with that being background, and knowing that the existing charter schools that are out there with the caps, at some point we thought might come to us and ask for an increase in that enrollment, it made sense to have the board have a board policy that memorializes the actual process of approving any increase in the enrollment cap. And so that's what this policy does, is it puts on paper the process for when we do get a request for an increase in the enrollment cap. We've got a set guideline, a roadmap on how, if the board chooses to approve it, how we would actually go about doing so. So we set forth some academic minimums, some minimum requirements that we would expect to see. Sometime, I believe it was at the November 2019 school board meeting, the board approved a charter school evaluation framework. So that will be the key and the basis for judging the charter schools, the brick and mortars, on how well they're doing. And so we've let out some guidelines on what needs to happen as far as the charter schools and how they are actually operating and how they're doing educationally. And so it says that as long as we are using the charter school evaluation policy and the framework, any charter school, if they request an increase in their enrollment, that every single one of their annual measures has to be at a certain level. If they get something that does not meet standard in any of those sections, then the board has the right to just deny the enrollment cap request. For the years where that is not actually happening, the charter school evaluation framework was supposed to start January of 2021, which would have utilized the 2019-2020 PSSA scores and PVAS scores and how they did academically during this current school year. But obviously, in light of what's going on with COVID-19, we set it up so that you would go to the latest PSSA scores. If the charter school evaluation framework is not available, then we use the aggregate PSSA scores for the comparable grades. We don't want to compare a K-8 charter school to the entire district, which is K-12. If we're going to make the comparison, it needs to be apples to apples. The last piece of the policy talks about what happens if and when the school district is finally out of financial watch status. While we have this here, under the financial improvement plan, it says that 30 kids per year, that's what we can lose. But once we leave that, we try to set some form of way to analyze, well, what is the true number of students that the district could quote unquote afford to lose from a financial standpoint. And so that would be laid out during the regular March meeting. We would have some kind of charter school enrollment budget assumption made up. We'd be able to run the numbers, or at least make a pretty good projection as to if we lost 30, 40, 25 kids to charter schools in the next year, how much would that cost us? And that would give the board some kind of level for how many students they would be able to approve. In the event that we would have one or more charter schools request an enrollment cap during any given year, then it would be up to the board to decide how they would want it to handle that. And we did set a deadline for when these requests for cap increases have to be set by. So that way, this is not something that the charter schools can do last minute, telling us in May that they want to increase for the next school year. That's just not going to happen. We set a deadline. And again, the one thing that I'll say is that this policy makes the process puts the process on paper, but in the end, it is ultimately the decision of the board to approve or deny any enrollment cap requests that we get. So with that, I'll open that up to questions.
Anyone?
Mr. Harkins,
Yes, Gwen.
did I hear Neil say only 30 students can be allowed per year to leave our district?
That's correct, Gwen. The financial improvement plan that we're under with the charter school stabilization portion of it states that historically we've been losing 60 students per year to charters and cyber charters. Under the plan, we would stem the tide and make it so that we were only losing 30 per year versus 60 per year.
All right. So as a parent, how would you tell me I can't take my child out?
So as
I'm just saying that's going to be a question some parents are going to come at you.
Just to clarify a little bit, that is the goal that is spelled out in the financial plan. The how we are accomplishing that mostly is through our marketing of what options we have here in the district. Part of that, though, is again we have started to initiate caps on charter schools. The idea there is not to limit the number of students in the long term that are going there. We're working with the charter schools to help them reach their whatever their goal is as far as the enrollment. Again, assuming that they're meeting the requirements, it just gives us a little ability to do that over time, so that we can manage it through our budget as well.
Okay. I just had to be the devil's advocate as a parent who may say that to you. All right, thank you.
Mr. President.
Angela.
Wouldn't the charter school have to tell them they just don't have any more openings? Or that's what I'm assuming. If we put a cap on them, and somebody tried to enroll their child, wouldn't they just simply tell them like we've at our cap and you can't bring them here?
That's correct.
I don't know.
No, you're correct, Angela. The charter schools, once they reach the cap, would start a wait list. And then any students who would choose to go to the charter schools would be placed on the wait list.
Neil, I have a question. I've never heard a charter school that's had their enrollment capped. And is it legal?
It is 100% legal.
Okay.
And
I agree to it.
Attorney Gornall is there. She can answer more.
Okay.
Right. It's a negotiated component of the charter. So if and I think that's how it's happened in this situation, that the school district was working with the charter school on their renewals, and as part of that process, almost like a settlement, like, all right, we're not going to challenge you, we're not going to challenge a renewal, we're not going to go to a hearing, we're not going to go to court and say that you're not complying or not able to meet the components of the charter school law for renewal. But the trade-off for that is they voluntarily agreed to certain caps. So it's not that the charter school law allows a school district to impose a cap. It's if the two parties agree to it in their charter. So it's a matter of contract as opposed to a matter of statute.
Okay. Okay.
Any more on the charter school cap policy? Thanks, Neil. Review of the next week's regular agenda. Has anyone reviewed it and have any questions or concerns or comments? Then we go to any other matter. There are several things. Gwen, I'm aware you want to talk about one, but Brian,
Yes.
Brian, did you decide to reschedule that John Boyd presentation?
I actually forgot about it, Mr. Harkins.
That's fine.
So I'll talk to him about potentially doing that in June.
That's fine. And Neil, that citizen inquiry I forwarded you about the Roosevelt memorabilia and the lockers, did you have a chance to do anything or contact that citizen?
I did contact that individual, and they are definitely interested in lockers. Once Ms. Cooley is done, I actually have a couple of things that I'd like to bring to the board's attention, so I'll address it. If that's okay with you, I can address it at that point.
Sure. Gwen, you ready?
All right. Yes. Thank you. As you all have known, Dr. Tucker passed, and he was funeralized today. And I have presented a proposal that since we're building a new science technology lab up at Erie High School, that it be named the Dr. Eva Tucker Jr. Science Technology Lab.
Okay, any discussion or anybody have anything else to add?
Mr. President, this is Angela.
Angela.
Gwen, I think that's a great idea. He was on the board for 32 years. He made great contributions to the board. He names stuff after people all the time. And, I think that he's more than deserving to get the science lab named after him. So that's a great suggestion. I appreciate that.
Gwen, are you wanting to put that on the agenda for next Wednesday's meeting for us to approve?
Yes.
Jenny, can you and or Tim work with Gwen to develop the language for that resolution to give it to Angela Jones by Friday?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Tyler, I just wanted to again thank Ms. Cooley for bringing that forward. I do, and to follow up with what Ms. McNair said, I think that's a wonderful way that the district could honor him.
He was a science teacher in his private life.
Yes, almost 40 years.
Gwen, I just think it was a great idea. Thank you so much for bringing that to the board.
Thank you.
And if we, to make the resolution, and it would be nice to put that kind of information into it, that Eva was on the board for 32 years, that he was a science teacher, and the kind of thing that gives a little, not just like a one sentence thing, but it's a little bit of a tribute to him. So maybe we can pull that information together and have it ready to go by Friday.
Yeah, Angela Jones
can help write that.
I might have spoken over somebody, but Angela Jones can help you with information, incidental things like that.
Okay. So maybe Angela and Gwen and I could work on that in the next day or two.
Good, Jen. Jen, are you going to be with us next Wednesday, or will Tim be back?
I think Tim will be back, but he and I talk a lot, so it's okay.
Okay. Neil, you ready?
I am, John. So first I'll answer your question. So I did touch base with that member of the community who was interested in actually purchasing lockers from Roosevelt. And so looking at the timeline for when the building could potentially be demoed, we have about a little bit more than a month, maybe a month and a week before, number one, the contract would be awarded. And so we've got a little bit longer before any kind of work actually happens. So I will make plans once our tradespeople come back to work to seeing about removing some of the lockers from the building for individuals like who sent me the email, as well as any of the other needs that we have in our building. I think now is the time to take anything out of that building that we could use in one of our buildings, for sure.
I'm just glad to hear there was some salvageable stuff, because I knew the school had gotten some deterioration and had gotten beat up in the years since it closed. So I'm glad that it can be done.
Yeah, and in fact, I have I've taken one group of people through the building this week. I'm taking somebody else tomorrow. I have another plan of somebody next week to who are basically pickers, who would want to purchase some of the wood doors and those kind of items. And so there's been pretty good interest so far, and so I think that'll help also. I'm definitely one who likes to reuse items more than throw them away. That's for sure. So then the two things that I'd wanted to at least bring to the board's attention. Number one is on the agenda already, and we didn't mention it today, and I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention, that the Connell Conservation Plan at Joanna Connell Elementary School is on the board agenda for approval next week. We got all of the paperwork that we needed from the individuals. We have the total budgeted price for the walkway around the grass area and the wetlands that are there. And so I at least wanted to bring it to everybody's attention on the board that this is on the agenda for voting next Wednesday. If you recall, we had the very nice presentation at our committee of the whole meeting where they outlined everything that they wanted to do. So I just wanted to make everybody aware. The other thing is that at the same time that Joanna Connell PTO approached myself and Mr. Polito, that they wanted to purchase some swings, and they wanted to have it installed at Joanna Connell. And so I was given that about 2 weeks ago, and I neglected to put it on the agenda. So if the board is okay, I can get it added to the supplemental new business for next Wednesday for approval, so that they can get working on that as well.
What was that topic, Neil?
So that's the PTO wants to purchase a swing set for Joanna Connell. It'll be placed behind the baseball field, behind them. And again, if the board is okay with it, I can get it added to the supplemental new business.
Neil, I have a question. Is that the project Lori Hogan was working on? Okay. All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there any other matter that any board member wishes to bring up and question or comment on at this time?
Mr. President,
Darlene
here. I remember past the prior board, board member Fabrizi or Director Fabrizi had a policy he talked about that had been put in place when we consolidated all of the we closed 3 elementary schools, and we consolidated that there be a survey that went out to teachers. And I was wondering if that would fall in any way, that policy would fall under what's happening right now with the online instruction, and if there would be a way for us to just survey our teachers, or maybe we're already doing that, to see how everything's going, if there's any way that we can assist them in what the great work they're doing. I've been talking to teachers, and they're doing a fantastic job, and many of them are working with parents up until 7, 8 o'clock at night, because that's when the parents get home and have had dinner. And our teachers have just been fantastic. But so I just wanted to mention that and see if there was a possibility we'd be able to survey them.
I'd like to think they'd have the opportunity to comment and question up through the chain to their building supervisors, but I'm not objecting to it, just so we don't get in the way with anything, Dar.
Okay.
That's not a criticism or a disagreement, just
No, I just remember there was a policy that Director Fabrizi had talked about a few times.
Mr. President,
Brian,
I'm not sure. Is that the policy about the morale?
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
We can take a look at that and see if that applies in this circumstance. But I don't know, Teresa, if you want to talk a little bit about how you're getting feedback from the buildings.
Sure. We're meeting with the EEA weekly, and the EEA currently has a survey out to their members, so we're receiving feedback through that process, and also through the ILTs. So we meet with the EEA again tomorrow, Dar. I'm not sure if both positive and negative and challenges. So I'm not sure how many items they'll come to us with, but we certainly can look into that.
Well, it sounds, Teresa, like you guys already have everything under control, and you're, following basically what was meant, the meaning of the policy. So that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
We do have an executive session, don't we, Brian?
Yes, we do.
Well, before we go to that, Neil, I know that there's the phased in plan of when everybody goes back to work, but I'm seeing a lot of the school grounds just aren't cut and they're looking pretty shabby. When do those guys, I mean, I think landscapers out working every day. When do those guys go back to work?
Right now, the plan is for them to go back on Monday. I'll be honest, Tom, we ordered some of the 4-head thermometers, and the delivery date that they gave us was May 1st through May 8th. And they just haven't come back yet. I mean, right now we're in the red phase. And even though they are landscapers, I did not necessarily feel comfortable bringing them back without having the thermometers in place. I'll be honest with you. But everybody will go back Monday. And we've got Paul Felak has worked on a schedule to getting all the landscaping back up to where it should be, because we do have the bus drivers and the laborers who can get out there and do all of that work in a much shorter time than they would if it was during the regular school year.
Thank you.
Anything else by anyone before we go to executive session? Well, thanks to Brian, Teresa, B, Neil, Angie, Erica, everybody that is continuing to do such great work, adjusting and adapting and getting us through all this day by day. And I salute and appreciate it. We all do. If there isn't anything else up to this point, we'll go to executive session at this point.